In the morning, the maid entered the room on the 23rd floor of the hotel, located in Dubai's business district. She was supposed to check why the guests were not answering calls from the reception desk. It was quiet inside. The air conditioner was running at full power, keeping the room temperature at around 18 degrees Celsius. Two people were lying on the bed, a man in his 50s and a young woman. Both were unconscious. The maid immediately called hotel security, and an ambulance arrived a few minutes later. The doctors pronounced both of them dead. The man was quickly identified as Khalid al-Manshari, a representative of one of the influential families in Abu Dhabi. He was involved in real estate and investments and often visited Dubai on business. Khalid was not a public figure, but he was well known in certain circles. He had a reputation as a man who preferred to stay in the shadows, but at the same time did not deny himself pleasures. That evening, he rented a room for 2 days, paying in cash, which is not uncommon for such guests. It was more difficult to identify the girl. She had no documents with her, only a passport with a photo that clearly did not match her face. The passport was in the name of Elena Voronina, 28 years old, a Russian citizen. But the girl looked younger, and her facial features were different. The police began an investigation, and a few days later, it turned out that the passport was fake. It had been purchased about 2 years ago in one of the districts of Sharjah, where such services are provided without unnecessary questions. The girl's body was sent to the morgue. The pathologist determined that she had died of asphyxiation. Traces of vomit were found in her respiratory tract, indicating that she had been unable to clear her throat and had suffocated. Death occurred approximately 3 or 4 hours after the man's death. Khalid died of a massive stroke that occurred during sexual intercourse. His heart could not withstand the strain, although he had not complained of any health problems prior to that moment. Numerous bruises of varying ages were found on the girl's body, on her ribs, arms, and back. Some of them were fresh, while others had been healing for several weeks. Investigators began to examine the room. The girl's phone was lying on the bedside table. It was unlocked, and the battery was almost dead. Inside, they found messages, photos, and several videos. One of them was made about a week before her death. The video shows a man, presumably Khalid, hitting the girl in the face and telling her to be quiet and not try to call anyone. The girl is crying and trying to cover her face with her hands. The man repeats several times that if she tries to escape, she will be found and killed. The video lasts about a minute. The quality is average, but the faces of both are clearly visible. Another recording was made 3 days before the tragedy. In it, the girl is sitting on the floor in the corner of the room and speaking to the camera. She introduces herself as Lisa Carter, says that her real name is Elizaveta Sokolova. She is 25 years old, and she is from Moscow. Lisa explains that she is recording this video in case something happens to her. She says that she has been held against her will for 2 years, that she is forced to work for men she does not choose. Lisa mentions several names, including Khalid. She says she tried to escape twice, but was caught, beaten, and threatened with the murder of her family in Russia. At the end of the recording, she apologizes to her parents and says she loves them. The girl wore a thin gold chain with a small pendant around her neck. On the back of the pendant was an engraving with the initials ES and the date, August 18, 2004. This was the date of birth of Elizaveta Sokolova. The chain was a gift from her parents on her coming of age, and she never took it off. This became one of the first pieces of evidence that the girl was indeed Lisa. The Dubai police contacted their Russian colleagues and passed on the information about the find. In Moscow, they began checking the databases of missing persons. A few days later, confirmation came. Elizaveta Sokolova had been listed as missing since the end of the summer of 2022. Her parents, Anna and Mikhail Sokolov, had filed a report with the police, but the search had been unsuccessful. The girl had disappeared without a trace, and the only thing that could be established at the time was that she had left Moscow voluntarily, buying a plane ticket to Istanbul. Anna and Mikhail lived in an ordinary Moscow apartment on the outskirts of the city. Mikhail worked as an engineer at a factory, and Anna taught at a school. Lisa was their only daughter. She studied at the Foreign Languages Department, spoke English well, and dreamed of traveling. After graduating from university, Lisa got a job at a travel company, helping to organize tours abroad. She was a sociable, energetic girl with many friends. Her parents did not notice anything strange in her behavior until she disappeared. In the summer of 2022, Lisa told her parents that she was going to Bali with a friend. She showed them photos of beaches and said that she wanted to relax and have new experiences. Mikhail and Anna did not object, although they were a little worried. Lisa promised to call every day and send photos. For the first few days, she did call and send photos. Then the connection was lost. Her parents tried to call her and sent her messages, but Lisa did not respond. A week later, they received a short message from her saying that everything was fine. She was just busy and would be back soon. After that, the connection was lost again. Mikhail and Anna waited another 2 weeks, then went to the police. Investigators began an investigation. It turned out that Lisa had indeed bought a ticket to Istanbul, but had not flown to Bali. She spent several days in Istanbul, staying at an inexpensive hotel in the Taksim area. After that, her trail went cold. According to border control data, Lisa left Turkey and flew to Dubai. There she passed through passport control, but there was no further information. Surveillance cameras at the airport recorded her in the arrivals hall, but then she disappeared from view. Her parents couldn't understand what had happened. Lisa had never mentioned wanting to go to the Emirates, and she had no acquaintances there. Anna tried to contact the friend with whom Lisa was supposedly going to Bali, but she said she knew nothing about the trip and had no plans to go anywhere with Lisa. It became clear that the girl had lied to her parents and left alone, but why remained a mystery. Mikhail hired a private detective who tried to find at least some clues. The detective checked Lisa's correspondence on social networks and talked to her colleagues and friends. Several people recalled that a month before her disappearance, Lisa had started communicating with someone on the internet. She did not share any details, but mentioned that she had met someone who had offered her a job abroad. Lisa said it was a good opportunity to earn money and see the world. Her friends didn't think much of it, assuming she was just excited about the idea and would soon forget about it. The detective requested access to Lisa's accounts, but most of her correspondence had been deleted. Only a small portion of the conversations could be recovered. In one of them, Lisa was communicating with a man named Dmitry, who introduced himself as the manager of a modeling agency. He offered her a job in Dubai, promising a good salary and paid accommodation. Lisa asked questions about what her duties would be, but Dmitry avoided giving direct answers, saying that they would discuss everything in person. He sent her plane tickets and asked her not to tell anyone about the trip, so as not to jinx it. Lisa agreed. It was a classic recruitment scenario. Dmitry used a tried and tested scheme. He promised easy money, created the illusion of caring, and then isolated the victim from her loved ones. When Lisa arrived in Dubai, she was met at the airport. The girl was taken to an apartment in one of the city's residential areas, where her documents were immediately taken away under the pretext of applying for a work visa. Instead of working as a model, she was told that she would be meeting men for money. When Lisa tried to refuse, she was beaten and locked in a room. They explained to her that she now had to work off her debt for the ticket, accommodation, and visa. The amount was enormous, and Lisa was told that if she tried to escape, they would find and kill her, as well as take revenge on her family in Moscow. Lisa spent the next 2 years in Dubai. She was transported from one place to another and forced to meet with different men. Sometimes she was kept in apartments, sometimes in hotels. She had no freedom of movement and was constantly monitored. Lisa tried to escape several times. Once she got out of the apartment when the guard fell asleep and ran to the nearest shopping center. She tried to ask the security guards for help, but they quickly found her and brought her back. After that, she was beaten so badly that she couldn't get out of bed for several days. The second time, she tried to contact the Russian consulate via the internet, but her correspondence was intercepted, and she was punished again. Khalid al-Manshari was one of her regular clients. He had met with Lisa several times during the last 6 months of her life. Khalid preferred girls with Slavic features, and Lisa fit his requirements. He paid her well for her time, but was often rude and aggressive. Lisa was afraid of him, but she had no choice. For their last meeting, Khalid booked a hotel room for 2 days. They were supposed to spend time together, and Lisa knew it would be difficult. She recorded a video on her phone telling her story, hoping that if something happened, someone would find the recording and understand the truth. That night, Khalid took a large dose of Viagra, even though doctors had warned him about his heart problems. He was sure he could handle it, but during sex, he had a stroke. Khalid lost consciousness instantly, his body going limp. Lisa was frightened and tried to revive him, but to no avail. She tried to reach for the phone to call an ambulance, but couldn't. The phone was on the table, and she was too weak to get up. She began to panic, and at that moment, Lisa started vomiting. She couldn't clear her airways, choked, and lost consciousness. Death came a few hours later. When the police began their investigation, it turned out that Khalid was not the only client of the network Lisa had fallen into. Behind this business was an organized group involved in human trafficking. There were several such groups operating in Dubai, working covertly and using complex schemes to avoid the attention of the authorities. Girls were recruited via the internet, promised jobs as models, waitresses, or nannies, and then forced into prostitution. Their documents were taken away immediately. They were isolated from the outside world and kept in a constant state of fear. The Dubai police arrested several people who were connected to this network. Lisa's parents flew to Dubai to collect their daughter's body. It was the most terrible trip of their lives. Anna couldn't believe that her daughter was dead, that she had been suffering for the last 2 years and couldn't call for help. Mikhail held it together, but inside, he was torn apart by pain and helplessness. At the morgue, they showed them Lisa's body. Anna recognized the necklace around her neck and burst into tears. It was the only thing that connected them to their daughter, the only proof that it was really Lisa. The Russian authorities opened a criminal case on the grounds of human trafficking and tried to identify everyone involved. Investigators questioned Dmitry, the manager who had recruited Lisa. He turned out to be an ordinary middleman who received a commission for every girl he brought in. Dmitry lived in Moscow, had a criminal record for fraud, and had already been caught in similar schemes. He did not know what happened to the girls after they flew abroad, and claimed that he was simply helping them find work. The court did not believe his version of events, and Dmitry was sentenced to prison. The story of Lisa Sokolova did not become a major scandal. The UAE authorities preferred not to blow the case out of proportion so as not to damage the country's reputation. Several of those arrested received prison sentences, while the rest went into hiding. The al-Manshari family paid for Khalid's funeral and tried to hush up the story by removing any mention of his death from the press. Lisa's parents returned to Moscow with their daughter's coffin. They buried her in a small cemetery in the Moscow region, where they often visited her grave. Anna was unable to cope with the loss. She dropped out of school, stopped leaving the house, and barely spoke. Mikhail tried to stay strong, but inside he was also broken. They blamed themselves for not being able to protect their daughter, for not understanding the trap she had fallen into. Friends and relatives tried to support them, but words could not ease the pain. Lisa's phone, which was found in the hotel room, was given to her parents. They looked through all the records, read the correspondence, and understood what their daughter had gone through. It was unbearable, but Anna and Mikhail wanted to know the truth. They wanted to understand what had happened to Lisa. why she had been unable to escape, why no one had helped her. There were few answers, but one thing became clear. Lisa had fought to the end, trying to survive and return home. The investigators understood that Lisa's story was just the tip of the iceberg. There were several groups operating in the city that used similar schemes and kept girls from different countries in similar conditions. They needed to find out who was behind the network that Lisa had fallen into and how deeply this structure was rooted in the Emirates. Farida al-Shahi, a 42-year-old woman who had been working in the police for 20 years, was appointed to investigate the case. Farida was one of the few women in her unit and had earned the respect of her colleagues through her professionalism and tenacity. She had been dealing with similar cases for several years and knew how criminal groups operated. Farida understood that the investigation would be difficult because such organizations always had cover and connections in law enforcement. Nevertheless, she was ready to see it through to the end. First, Farida examined Lisa's phone. In addition to videos and correspondence, there were photos that the girl had taken secretly. Some of them showed the faces of the men who had come to see her. Farida sent the photos to the forensic department to try to identify these people. The phone also contained geolocations of several places where Lisa had been held in recent months. These were apartments in different areas of Dubai, in Deira, Barsha, and Al Nada. Farida sent teams to check these addresses. The first apartment was located in an old residential complex in the Deira district. The building was unremarkable, unguarded, with peeling paint on the walls. The police went up to the 5th floor and knocked on the door. No one answered. They broke down the door and went inside. The apartment was empty, but signs of recent human presence were evident. There were mattresses on the floor, empty water bottles, and cigarette butts in the rooms. Cheap curtains hung on the walls, and the windows were tightly closed. In one of the rooms, they found women's clothing, cosmetics, and several passports thrown in the corner. The passports belonged to girls from Ukraine, Moldova, and Uzbekistan. The police began checking these documents. The second apartment was found in a more respectable neighborhood, Barsh. It was a modern residential complex with security and video surveillance. The police requested the camera recordings for the last 2 months. The recordings showed different men entering the apartment several times. Their faces were partially hidden, but 2 of them were identified. One of them turned out to be a local businessman who owned several beauty salons and massage parlors. The second was a taxi driver who worked illegally and moonlighted as a courier for various dubious services. Both were detained for questioning. The businessman, whose name was Omar, initially denied any connection to the apartment. He claimed that he had only been there once by mistake, but when he was shown the records showing that he had entered and left several times, Omar changed his testimony. He said that he had rented the apartment for an acquaintance who had asked him for a favor. Omar claimed that he did not know what the apartment was needed for and received a small amount of money for the rent. Farida did not believe him, and the investigators began to dig deeper. It turned out that Omar had connections with several people suspected of human trafficking. His beauty salons were used as places where girls were brought for initial selection. There they were examined, photographed, and decisions were made about where to send them next. The taxi driver Karim was more talkative. He admitted that he had driven girls from the airport to various apartments several times. Karim said that he didn't ask any questions, just carried out orders and received cash payments. He knew something was wrong because the girls looked scared, and the men who accompanied them were rude and threatening. Karim named several people who had ordered his services. Among them was Tarek, who had already been arrested, and several others whom the police did not yet know about. Farida compiled a list of suspects and began checking each one. It was painstaking work because many of them used fake documents and were living in the country illegally. Some managed to flee as soon as the arrests began. But 3 more people involved in running the network were detained. One of them turned out to be a key figure, a man named Jamal, a Syrian citizen who had been living in Dubai for 10 years. Jamal had a legitimate business, He owned a small transport company that dealt with freight transportation. But in reality, his company was a cover for criminal activity. Jamal was smart and cautious. He never contacted the girls directly, always acting through intermediaries. He managed the financial flows, decided who to send where, and controlled the entire chain. Jamal was the person who made the most profit from this business. When he was arrested, he remained calm and showed no emotion. During questioning, Jamal refused to speak, referred to his lawyer, and did not admit guilt. But Farida knew she had enough evidence to prove his involvement. During a search of Jamal's home, a laptop and several flash drives containing data were found. They contained tables with the names of the girls, their arrival dates, the amounts they had to work off, and lists of clients. These were detailed records that had been kept over several years. Farida passed the data on to analysts, who began to sort through the information. It turned out that about 150 girls had passed through this network over the past 5 years. Most of them were from former Soviet countries: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and Kazakhstan. Some of them returned home, some remained in the Emirates, and the fate of many was unknown. The police began checking databases of missing persons and tried to determine how many of these girls could have been victims of the same scheme. They found about 20 matches. These were girls who had disappeared under similar circumstances. They had left the country supposedly to work and then vanished. Their relatives had filed reports, but the search had been unsuccessful. Now it became clear that many of them had fallen into the same network as Lisa. Farida contacted the law enforcement agencies of the countries where these girls came from and began to coordinate joint efforts. One of these girls was Anastasia Kovaleva from Kiev. She was 23 when she disappeared 3 years ago. Anastasia was studying to be a nurse, working part-time at a hospital, and dreaming of saving money to continue her education. One day, she saw an ad online for a nursing job at a private clinic in Dubai. The salary was high, and the conditions were good. Anastasia responded, had a video interview, and was offered a contract. She told her parents that she was going to work and promised to send money. She called them for the first few weeks, and everything was fine. Then the connection was lost. Her parents became worried, tried to call her, wrote to the clinic, but were told that Anastasia had quit and left. No one has heard from her since. Anastasia's name was on the lists found at Jamal's place. Next to her name was a note. Worked for 8 months, sent to Abu Dhabi. The Abu Dhabi police began an investigation, but Anastasia could not be found. Either she was in hiding, or she was no longer alive. Anastasia's parents, upon learning of the investigation, flew to Dubai, hoping to get at least some information about their daughter. Farida met with them and told them what she knew, but could not give a definite answer as to whether Anastasia was alive. The parents returned home with the hope that their daughter would be found, but with each passing day, that hope faded. Another girl on the list was Marina Levina from Minsk. She was 26 years old, worked as an administrator at a fitness club, and was raising her young daughter alone. Marina dreamed of giving her daughter a good education, but she didn't have enough money. She saw an offer for a job as a hostess in a restaurant in Dubai. The salary was decent, and they promised accommodation and a visa. Marina agreed, left her daughter with her mother, and left. For the first 2 months, she really did work as a hostess and sent money home. But then her passport was taken away, and her working conditions changed. Marina was forced to meet with men and threatened that if she refused, she would be deported without any money and would not be able to support her daughter. Marina agreed because she was afraid of losing everything. She worked for another 6 months and then disappeared. Marina's mother filed a report with the police, but no trace of her daughter was found. Marina's name was also in Jamal's documents. Next to her name was a note. Problematic. Transferred to Sharjah. The Sharjah police began a search, but Marina was never found. Perhaps she ran away and went into hiding somewhere. afraid that she would be found and punished. Or perhaps she was killed so that she could not tell what she had seen. Marina's fate remains unknown, as do the fates of many other girls on that list. Farida understood that the investigation could drag on for years. Many of those involved had disappeared, and those who had been arrested did not want to talk. But she was determined. Farida knew that every detail uncovered was a chance to save at least one life, to prevent one tragedy. She continued to work, interrogate, and collect evidence. During the investigation, it was established that the network Lisa had fallen into was part of a larger international structure. Girls were recruited not only in Russia and the CIS countries, but also in Eastern Europe, Africa, and Asia. They were brought to Dubai and then distributed to various countries in the Persian Gulf, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. Similar schemes were in place everywhere, and there were people who controlled this business everywhere. It was a large-scale operation that brought in millions of dollars in profits annually. Farida contacted Interpol and passed on the information to them. A joint investigation involving several countries was launched. It was a long and difficult process, but gradually new suspects were identified, arrested, and the chains were broken. However, it was almost impossible to completely destroy this network. Others took the place of those who had been arrested, and the business continued because there was demand. Lisa's parents followed the investigation from afar. Mikhail regularly called Farida, asked about progress, and hoped that at least some of the guilty parties would be punished. Farida always answered honestly and did not hide the difficulties. She understood the parents' pain and tried to do everything possible to ensure that justice prevailed. Anna, on the other hand, hardly spoke, withdrawing into herself and silently grieving her loss. The only thing she did was write a letter to several human rights organizations, asking them to help in the fight against human trafficking. Some organizations responded, began to publish materials, and draw attention to the problem. But in practice, there were few changes. Criminal groups adapted, began to operate more covertly, and used new technologies for recruitment. Instead of open advertisements, they began to work through closed groups on social networks and messengers, where they checked each new member. They became more cautious, changed their schemes, and used cryptocurrency for payments so as not to leave any traces. The fight against them was becoming increasingly difficult. Let's go back to that night at the hotel. Khalid took a large dose of Viagra, despite doctors warning him about his heart problems. He was 52 years old, overweight, and had high blood pressure, but he ignored these facts. That evening, Khalid wanted to impress, to prove to himself that he was still young and strong. Lisa was there against her will. She had been brought to the hotel a few hours before the meeting, given instructions on how to behave, and warned that if she tried to escape or call for help, the consequences would be serious. Around midnight, Khalid suffered a massive ischemic stroke. A blood vessel in his brain burst from overload. His blood pressure skyrocketed to critical levels, and his heart couldn't cope. Khalid lost consciousness instantly. His body went limp and fell onto the bed. Lisa was frightened. She tried to shake him and call out to him, but he did not respond. The girl understood that she needed to call an ambulance immediately, but she was afraid. Her phone was on the bedside table, but she didn't dare pick it up. She was afraid that if she called, she would be blamed for what had happened, punished, or handed over to the police, who would deport her without trial. Lisa rushed around the room, trying to figure out what to do. She checked Khalid's pulse. There was none. The man was dead. The girl began to panic. She started to hysterically cry, unable to breathe normally, suffocating from fear. Lisa sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to calm down, but her body wouldn't obey her. Suddenly, she began to feel nauseous. She tried to run to the bathroom, but didn't make it in time. The vomit got into her airways. Lisa tried to cough it up, but her throat was blocked and she couldn't breathe. She fell to the floor and tried to get up and reach the sink, but she didn't have the strength. The girl was suffocating. She scratched the floor with her fingernails and tried to roll over, but her muscles wouldn't work. She was running out of oxygen, and her consciousness began to fade. Lisa knew she was dying, and there was nothing she could do about it. The last thing she thought about was her parents. She imagined their faces, remembered how her mother had hugged her before she left, how her father had waved goodbye. Lisa wanted to ask for forgiveness, wanted to say that she loved them, but the words wouldn't come out. A few minutes later, her heart stopped. Lisa's body was found a few hours later. She was lying on the floor between the bed and the bathroom, her face blue, her eyes open. Khalid remained on the bed in the same position in which he had died. The door was locked from the inside, and no one heard what had happened. The air conditioner was running at full power, keeping the temperature low, so the bodies did not begin to decompose quickly. It was only when the maid entered in the morning that the tragedy became known. The pathologist determined the exact cause of death for both of them. Khalid died of a stroke, caused by a Viagra overdose and physical exertion. Lisa died of asphyxiation caused by vomit entering her respiratory tract. If she had called an ambulance in time, Khalid might not have been saved, but she herself would have survived. The fear instilled in her by those who kept her in slavery cost the girl her life. She feared more than death. She feared punishment. She feared for her parents. She feared what would be done to her if she broke the rules. Lisa's parents only learned all the details of that night a few weeks later, when they received the full report of the investigation. Anna couldn't finish reading it. She closed the folder and never opened it again. Mikhail read everything, from the first page to the last. He wanted to know the truth, no matter how terrible it was. He realized that Lisa could have survived if she hadn't been afraid. This realization tore him apart inside. His daughter did not die at someone else's hands, but from the fear that had been instilled in her during 2 years of slavery. The trial of Jamal and the other members of the network took place 6 months later. Jamal was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Omar, the owner of the beauty salons, received 15 years. Karim, the taxi driver, received 7 years for aiding and abetting. Tarek, who directly controlled Lisa and the other girls, received 20 years. Several other people received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. But many of those involved were never found. They fled abroad, changed their names, and continued the same business in other countries. Mikhail and Anna did not attend the trial. They did not want to see the faces of those who had destroyed their lives. The verdict was read to them over the phone, and they simply nodded without saying a word. Justice had formally prevailed, but that brought no relief. Lisa would not return, and nothing could change that fact. Farida closed the case 8 months after the investigation began. She did everything she could, but she understood that it was only a drop in the ocean. Human trafficking continued. Girls continued to disappear, die, and suffer. Farida continued to work on other cases, but Lisa's story stayed with her. Every time she saw a photo of another missing girl, she remembered Lisa and wondered if they would be able to save her. The story of Lisa Sokolova is the story of one girl out of hundreds who disappear every year. She dreamed of seeing the world, earning money, helping her parents. Instead, she lived in fear for 2 years, endured violence and humiliation, and then died of suffocation on the floor of a hotel room because she was afraid to call for help. Her death could have been prevented, but it wasn't. The system that kept her in slavery killed her long before that night. It killed her will, her hope, her desire to fight. And when the moment came when she could have saved herself, she didn't dare to act.